Welcome to episode 210 of Silver Lining for Learning. I'm very excited about the episode today. We have, in recent months, been working our way through the 5 national artificial intelligence institutes that are dedicated to education. And the one that I'm part of is the only one that's for older adults. The other 4 are all centered in pre-college, although certainly they're developing things that can have implications far beyond that. And I'm very excited about Engage AI. And I'll tell you why. For years, I've taught a course on motivation and learning at Harvard. And it's the only course in the ed school that deals at all with motivation. And yet, I feel, and I think both theory and evidence show, that a huge part of the lack of learning in schools is that students are just incredibly demotivated. And much has been written about this, but little has been done. So maybe AI can provide a kind of leverage that we've not seen before. I try to give engaging talks. And when people come up to me afterwards and they say, wow, that was great. My talks, people just, I don't know, they're not interested. They fall asleep or they get up and leave or something. I always have the same answer. It's 3 words long. Tell a story. Tell a story and people will start listening. So with that kind of foreshadowing, I'm going to ask James, as the PI and director of Engage AI, to start, and then Kip, and then Gautam, and then we'll go from there.
Good.
Wonderful. Well, Chris, thanks for having us all. We're delighted to be here. I'm James Lester. I'm a faculty member in computer science at North Carolina State University and director of the NSF-AI Institute for Engaged Learning, which we call Engage AI, as you said. I have for many years been deeply interested in the application of AI to education. I've been working on this for, 35 years or something like that. And it is a fascinating field. It's been around since 1970, as folks here know. But really, there's been kind of a sea change in the field itself over the last 5 years with the emergence of LLMs. Now, in parallel with that, I have a deep and abiding interest in a long line of work in interactive narrative. The intelligent narrative technologies community has been around for about 30 years. And this is a subfield of AI that's dedicated to, I'll say, discovering in a kind of platonic way, underlying technologies that can create interactive narratives. And this is a very rich field of investigation. And in many ways, Engage AI is kind of predicated on the merge of these 2 areas. So AI and education and interactive narrative. And I hope we get a chance to maybe dive into this today.
Good morning, everyone. Kip Glazer, proud principal of Mountain View High School in Mountain View, California. And I became involved with Engage AI at the recommendation of my professor at Pepperdine University in 2015 and on. Engage AI wasn't around back then, but I was pursuing my doctorate in learning technologies. And since Chris brought it up, let me tell you a story. The reason why I decided to pursue my doctorate was because when Anderson Cooper was doing 360 holographic interviews of will.i.am on the day that President Obama was elected, I had an epiphany. I thought, if we can beam Toni Morrison into my English class, what's the point of teacher? And if I can't beat them, I might as well join them. So I need to learn what this technology is all about and how we can leverage that to teach our students. And since then, I changed my mind. I don't think that teachers can ever be replaced, and that there is a narrative out there that somehow these AI tools can do so. And I think it's very important that we recognize what the difference between these large language models and what they can do versus what human can do. And that's the reason why I keep putting myself in this situation in the space with lots of NSF researchers, because I believe that the great research that is happening in the research space needs to have impact in practice, and sometimes we don't always have that translator in between. So I consider myself to be advocate of my practitioner partners in translating, which is a form of narrative. That's why I'm part of the Engage AI Practitioner Advisory Board. I'm excited to be here.
Hi, I'm Gautam Biswas. I'm a professor of computer science at Vanderbilt University in Nashville, Tennessee. Like James, I have been working for a long, long time in the area of AI and education, but I came into it in a slightly different way. When I first came to Vanderbilt, I had the privilege of meeting some really well-known learning scientists or learning technologists, as they were called then, John Bransford and Dan Schwartz, and they had this vision 35 years ago that, rather than getting students to solve problems on pencil and paper, it would be so much easier for researchers and for teachers to get them to work on computers, because then, collecting the data, analyzing it would become so much faster. So that's how I got started. And it was natural, given the background and that I was interacting with them, that we formed this idea of what we call open-ended learning environments, which is somewhat different from the traditional AI and education approach that was prevalent in those days, which were intelligent tutoring systems. So the idea was very much like what James said, that you give students a fairly open-ended problem to solve, and you give the students the tools and the opportunities to try to evolve their solutions as they would like. And the important thing about this was it promoted critical thinking. So what we in learning sciences called, or in AI and education called, metacognition and self-regulated learning. So I very much got into that. But then as we build these systems, it became clear that what we needed to do was understand how students were going about their problem solving, because you give students complex problems, they often ran into difficulties. And so it became very important to be able to understand when they were getting stuck or having difficulties, and then help them along the way, not by giving them solutions, but by giving them hints that allowed them to advance. And that has brought me to, James and I have worked in parallel for many, many years. So it was a great opportunity for us to come together for the Engage AI Institute. And my primary role in the Engage AI Institute is doing multimodal learning analytics. We moved from, students working individually in front of a computer to students working in groups solving complex problems, or students trying to embody scientific processes by moving around in rooms. And it's become really important not just to look at what happens on the computer screen or the data you collect on the computer, but what happens outside of the environment as students interact, to try and solve problems on the computer. So that it becomes extremely important to, collect the rich conversations students have as they work on problems, and sometimes also to use video to see how they're interacting with each other, how they move around in the classroom, when they go interact with the teacher, and so on and so forth. So it's been really exciting to try to collect such data in the wild, in real classroom environments, and then find efficient ways to analyze this data so we can online, so that we can then provide feedback or suggestions to students, especially when they seem to have difficulties or get stuck in these environments. So I'll stop here, and I'm looking forward to the discussion. Thanks for having me on.
I'll just quickly say a couple things that the discussion so far has reminded me of. One of them is in the heyday of cognitive AI, classic AI, a philosopher at UC Berkeley, Hubert Dreyfus, was a very big critic of AI because he argued that cognitive reasoning was only a small part of general intelligence. And the people who thought we could get to artificial general intelligence by just building more and more and more if-then rules into computers were in for a rude awakening. And when he was challenged on this, the answer that he gave was that he would be very impressed if cognitive AI could understand a children's story, like Goldilocks and the Three Bears, because fundamentally that involves both common sense reasoning, which AI doesn't have, and it involves fantasy, which AI doesn't really understand. And so his criticisms were very influential and ultimately forced cognitive AI to move in other directions. But then you brought up Bransford and the whole team at Vanderbilt and the Jasper Woodbury initiative, which was, and this shows how long ago it was on video disc, interactive video disc. And what the team did, and correct me if I'm oversimplifying here, is recognize that word problems in mathematics are intrinsically uninteresting and also very difficult to transfer into the real world. And so they created these video-based narratives where some of the clues for doing the mathematics to understand the problem were conversational, and some of the clues were embedded in the visuals in the scene, so that there was a really good prospect for transfer into the real world. They caused quite a controversy because for one problem, it took a week. And all the math people said, no, 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 we have far too much to cover. Well, as we've talked about on this program before, the math that's taught in second grade is retaught in fourth grade, and then retaught in sixth grade, and then retaught in eighth grade, etc., because the kids never really learn it. And less may be more in terms of this kind of learning. So that was a success for interactive narrative, even though it didn't really involve AI. So I've rambled on enough about the past. Lydia?
Yeah, thank you for the discussion thus far. I was also reminded by this conversation, as Chris just mentioned, the complexity of human intelligence beyond the cognitive dimension, also the complexity of classroom beyond just students' interaction with the computer. And you use the word like, the learning in the wild is a very complex ecosystem when it comes to classroom. And so my question, I'm very intrigued by Engage AI amazing work in like also pushing beyond the narrative of like using AI just for tutoring. I want to learn more about this AI enabled interactive storytelling, if you can tell us more.
Sure, maybe I can take this one. There are kind of two flavors of it that I think are really fascinating. And I will say that all my remarks are going to be a little bit at a high level, and the underlying technologies will probably have changed by the time this podcast ends. So these things are moving very, very quickly. The first flavor I'll describe is kind of the learner experience. So imagine a learner, and in Engage AI, we, as Gautam mentioned, are very interested in collaborative manifestations of interactive narrative. But imagine a learner or a group of learners interacting with a story. And by that, I mean a system that is creating an interactive experience that's immersive. So the super underlying technologies are usually 3D game engines, but they needn't be. There could be different, what are called realization media. For example, you could imagine an interactive novel that could be very engaging in its own right. And then there's a system that makes decisions about plot. So Imagine a sort of virtual playwright who is making decisions about kind of a narrative arc. And when one particular event should happen as learners are interacting with characters in the world and sending directives down to characters to advance the problem solving. So work in a sort of problem-based learning instantiation of interactive narrative. And these, as Chris said, can create, when they work, can create very motivating experiences. So we all know there's an enormous industry in film, very much because narrative has this incredible inherent power to it. And the same thing is true, of course, in other media as well. Like, for example, text. We don't, in the AI Institute, don't focus so much on textual narrative, but these same, what sometimes called narrative transportive capabilities play into many different forms of narrative. The other flavor of narrative that we work in, and this is particularly exciting because it is not one that we anticipated when we were forming the Institute now over 4 years ago. The sort of catchphrase that we sometimes use is narrative generation. And what I mean by that is, imagine a system that could create a system that could create narratives, all right? So what if there could be a system that could support designers in this sort of very engaging process of designing narratives? And those designers, they could be instructional designers, for example, they could be learning scientists. We're particularly interested in what would it mean for teachers to be the designers of these interactive narratives. And we have a very active project in the Engage AI Institute called Scenecraft, which is a system that is kind of a very rich prototype we've been working on for several years now to be a narrative generator. It's an amazing thing. And had not LLMs appeared on the scene, this would not have been possible. And it's just an amazingly exciting time.
I want to pick up on your comment, Chris, on transmedia storytelling. So again, I'll go back in history. You talked about the video discs, and that's when I joined the group. And what we were able to do was, say, build simple AI tools like an interactive planner, where students could, after they had observed the narrative, could come work in this environment. It provided them tools with finding a solution to the problem. And the advantage of working on the computer, A, was we could collect all the work that we did, but more importantly for the students, as they were generating the solution, they could verify what they were doing. And so that was very successful. But come to the point what James is describing now. The idea is that the whole process, starting from the narrative to the problem solving, right, to the feedback students get, to additional problems that can be proposed, right, that are related to the original problem they solved. The entire process, because we're working on STEM learning, primarily science, starting from understanding a problem to doing the inquiry to set up the problem solving and then generating the solution, now fits into a full environment that technology permits. And as James also mentioned, this more advanced technologies like LLMs, etc., or providing visualizations that the students can interact with, gives students the opportunity to actually try what if solutions, right? What if I did it this way? And they get back the consequences right away. So that promotes these critical thinking skills that we would like them to develop. And because the environments are interesting, because of the narrative, the tools that are provided, students are more engaged. And though we don't directly measure motivation, which is very hard to measure on a computer, right? We can see that as in classrooms as we run these studies and in the classroom.
And I just wanted to think about how LLML, large language model, could potentially support the student motivation from a practitioner's perspective. And I think it actually disrupts the traditional way of sequencing curriculum that is already proposed by the teacher in the classroom. And I think this actually offers the opportunity to even introduce like surprise endings, right? So as Gautam is talking about what if scenarios, because traditionally when you're designing school curriculum, just naturally it becomes like beginning, middle to the end. And I think part of narrative is flipping the script, right? So then you present actually the end of the story first and allow the divergent thinking to occur in a system that can actually enhance the storytelling impact, which could definitely encourage student motivation. And I think that's the exciting part about it. And I do agree that it's difficult to measure motivation per se, but I think you can estimate by measuring the persistence, right? How many times they try as they are failing, if you will, or not getting to the answer. And I think that's something that we should definitely think about, because I see a lot of students just doing school rather than learning, because they see it as a very transitional activity rather than expansion of their intelligence and knowledge gaining.
Thank you. I think I'm going to jump in here. So this is a question that I've asked all of the AI centers episodes that we have had so far. And so, it's almost like the world discovered AI in November of 2023, was it, or 2022, right? And for all of you who've been working in this space for so long, that's both a boon and a curse. That's the way I see it, right? So the boon is, like, Chris said, the moment we have an episode which has the letters AI in it, it generates a lot of interest on LinkedIn. We know that we are going to get more viewers for that reason, which is not the reason we do this, because we are genuinely curious about learning more. But it is the fad of the moment, right? So the advantage clearly is suddenly the work that you've been doing is of greater interest to people. Now there's the flip side to it, which is that as researchers, as scholars, as educators, Kip, in the classroom, we are very sort of careful and nuanced about the claims that we make. And suddenly we are in this world where, it's doom, it's gloom, it's wonderful. We're going to cure everything. Every child is going to have this amazing tutor, which sort of misrepresents in many ways the complexities of just human engagement with each other and what happens in actual classrooms, like Lydia sort of alluded to at the very beginning. So I have two questions. I'll ask another slightly different question after follow up. But I'm just curious about how you are dealing with this tension, because you're living it, I'm sure, every moment, right? That where you are now the hot sort of item in the world. At the same time, you're also being like, okay, guys, let's approach this thoughtfully and sort of intentionally. So I wonder how each of you is dealing with that in your sort of work now that this sort of has, become the flavor of the year or the month or whatever it may be. I don't know, whoever wants to go first.
Punya, I think that you've really hit the nail on the head. So there's this spectrum of overwrought enthusiasm on the one hand and end of the world on the other. And the reality is that the technologies are, of course, changing very, very quickly. But for education, and this is my view, we're going to be living through a little bit of a bump for a while as we sort of iron out the wrinkles of the LLM cheating and so on and so forth, which are important to address, but are in many ways really not terribly interesting. However, I think that it's also the case that we are very quickly going to enter into a kind of AI ubiquity moment, and I think it will come sooner than most people believe. And that's very hard to predict what it will be like. The onus is kind of on us to shape this to be a good moment rather than a mediocre moment. It's also an opportunity to kind of fundamentally re-envision what does it mean to be learners, to be teachers in classrooms. And I think it's pretty rare that you get a moment like this in education, and it's really, really important that we take advantage of this moment to create the kind of best possible learning interactions and student futures that we can.
Yeah, if I could, I will complement what James just said, and add something that sometimes people forget. They think that AI has become so powerful that it can just go in and improve everything. But what we have learned working with teachers and going into the classroom is that the human AI component is really, really important, and that is not a trivial problem to solve. So the first thing is that when we go into a classroom, we are not telling the teachers that we are trying to replace them or that they don't do things well enough, and therefore we are going to introduce AI to solve their problems. The idea is that we are telling the teachers, here are additional tools that you can use to improve your teaching and instruction, to be able to follow in much more detail how your students are doing, where they are having difficulties, where in a classroom of 30 it's not easy for the teachers to do that. And even worse, right, when we first started using technology in the classrooms, the teacher's response was, hey, you sit students in front of laptops, 30 of them, and they all seem to be extremely engaged, but we have no idea what the students are doing. And no teacher really likes that. So we had to start coming up with ways in which we weren't just collecting logs and analyzing student learning and behaviors for ourselves to publish the next paper, but how could we convert it into a form that the teachers would find effective and use? And I think with these more advanced technologies, in some sense, we are provided with more and more sophisticated tools where we can take the complex analytics that we perform, right, in order to understand students' learning and behaviors and present it to teachers in a form that's more understandable. So I just wanted to add that point.
Thank you. Thank you, Gautam. Kip?
Yeah, I think the AI-enabled tools, and I agree with what James and Gautam just said. And from a practitioner perspective, what I see the peril of AI, if you will, is enhancing the terrible practice that already existed, and it makes it faster, right? Generating more worksheets, if you will. And I'm just going to it makes me so sad, right? Because we know that the learner interaction with very fixed material that is boring, and more of that is just the tragedy of these AI tools. And we do need definitely better framing and more literacy development among the educators. And I definitely think that the pre-service programs and post support PD programs from the universities can definitely play a huge role, because when I get new teachers coming into my schools wanting to be teachers, first of all, there are very few of them, so I'm just so thankful for them. And the training they're getting is not necessarily fitting of that pedagogical strength, right? So I would love the researchers to definitely think about that. And also how, if we can extend every piece of great technology, has always, from my perspective, ignorant perspective, if you will, is extended human capacity for being able to learn more or extend cognition. And AI does it in a way that is very communal, right? It's not just about you're interacting with one piece of knowledge, but like you have a whole data set of knowledge. And how do we leverage that to enhance what my students definitely are asking for, which is the social emotional support? What is the point of more knowledge if it's going to be used against them in terms of environmental peril and other scary thoughts that are being popularized by these social media ills and all the things? So, and that's why I'm so grateful that Engage AI has made a commitment to have the practitioner advisors advisory board to invite the practitioners into the conversation. And I think that every AI institute should really definitely think about that.
Thank you, Kip. So I really appreciate that. In fact, I think it's interesting that I think in a couple of our episodes, we've had K-12 participants with the AI Institute. So I think that is something that is being taken quite seriously. Chris, I'm going to actually have you. My next question was in a completely different direction of the broader social sort of thing of AI. And it seems to me that the questions that you and Lydia have are sort of more focused on this. So rather than shift, why don't the two of you go? And if we have time at the end, I'll bring up the other question that I
Sounds
had.
good, Punya. So, Kip, when you were talking, I was reminded of the apocryphal saying attributed to the British Navy that the floggings will continue until morale improves. And sometimes you get that sense about what's going on in schools. We've been using the term multimodal learning analytics, which is a technical term that at least some of our viewers may not understand. So I'd like to drill down into that a little and then ask the three of you about some of the opportunities and challenges of doing that. So in interaction with other human beings, either in a group or individually, we pay attention to many, many different dimensions of what's going on beyond what's being said, how it's being said, voice tone, what's called prosody, which deals with pauses and other kinds of inflections, facial expressions and other kinds of nonverbal communications, gestures. It's a very rich set of data on which we understand where the other person is and what they're trying to say to us and come back to that. And of course, that poses very difficult challenges for computers. But as Gautam said, you can't just hand a computer the transcript and say, now make sense of this, because the transcript is very flat and leaves out an incredible number of these other dimensions. So my sense was at the recent summit of the National AI Institutes that a number of them were really working hard on this multimodal dimension and how do you take these very rich data streams, align the data, and then help the computer not to draw as many conclusions from it as a human being might draw, but at least to draw richer conclusions than you can get from a transcript. And I just wonder how you feel that's coming. How much traction are we getting on what is really a wicked problem, especially in classroom settings with children's voices and lots of noise?
Yeah.
And where are some of the frontiers left?
So yeah, this is a great question because multimodal analytics or multimodal data collection can be a boon, like you just described, Chris. It could also be a curse, and we see both when we go into classrooms. But I'll start with the good aspects of multimodal analytics. It's exactly as you described. And one of the situations or one of the environments where it has become most apparent is two of our researchers, learning sciences researchers, Noel NAD and Joshua Danish, work in embodied learning. So they're getting little kids, say elementary school kids or lower middle school kids, to enact scientific processes. And in the process, they find that learning is much more holistic. They are able to capture the socio-cultural aspects of people interacting together to solve a problem, along with the cognitive and the affective components of learning. So it was very interesting. The usual thing that AI researchers do as soon as we've collected our first set of multimodal data, we went and told the learning science researchers, hey, we can run these AI algorithms through, and we will be able to motion track every student. We will track their faces and be able to give you what their affective states were. We can look at their pose and their pointing and give you gestures. And they said, stop, right? I mean, we want none of this, right? They do interaction analysis, which is a very fine-grained analysis of videos. So they will look at, say, 1-minute episodes of a particular group of students to see how they are interacting with each other or with the teacher and how they're interacting with each other. Exactly as you said, Chris. So it turned out, right, our systems are no longer AI driven, but it's human driven with AI in the loop to facilitate the problem solving. So they look at things, they find certain patterns of behavior that are interesting, and then we as AI researchers try and find ways in which we can find other instances of these patterns over the entire episode of learning that takes place. And that gives the something that would take the learning sciences researchers weeks or even months sometimes to discover. They're able to discover at a much faster rate. But the point is that they are still driving the process. So that way, what is happening is the interpretation and how to respond to it. So we are currently working with researchers. We've developed this timeline tool where we take the different analyses we can do and put them on a timeline. So they can look at slices of the timeline and say, hey, this looks interesting because here this small group of students were interacting with each other. You can make that out by the gaze. Or the gaze tells us that there was a small group of students looking at the screen together. One of them was pointing at the screen and they were having an animated discussion about something. So we can find those kind of events and then help them interpret what it means. So our goals are now we work this out with researchers. We have the timeline. We get them to help us identify what are important events and then we automate that process using AI. And eventually, the next step is going to be, like James mentioned, now we have large language models. Once the learning science researchers have given some meaning to these events, we can then use large language models to translate them into a form that teachers can interpret. So I think that's one of the ways, or that's the primary way that we are using multimodal analytics. In collaborative learning, there isn't as much movement in the classroom, but we do often see if you have a camera on the class, that sometimes students are getting up, not just working in their own groups, they go up and talk to someone else in some other group because they're having some difficulties. And all these are very interesting learning moments that we can capture, analyze, and help the teacher interpret how the classroom is behaving or performing. I know I'm going too long, but I'll just make a short comment about the other side. There are also problems with collecting multimodal data. We are in some sense, right, collecting very personal data. So that the question naturally arises, right? Who is this data for? Should it stay just within the classroom? Is it between the students and their teacher, right? Or should some of it, be made available to others? And that is the AI ethics question and the privacy and security questions. Security we can handle because that's a computer science problem. But this privacy, the ethics issue is sometimes biased because AI algorithms are often biased because they're not trained on the right population. All these are issues that we are having to deal with and convince the population for which we are developing these systems for that in a sense that it is more beneficial to them than harmful. But there are policies and safeguards we have to create, which is not entirely us as researchers, but the bigger community has to come up with so that we can work within confines that is fair, right, and addresses the equity problem for everyone.
Maybe I can build on what Gautam has said. There's another initiative within the Engage AI Institute on multimodal learning analytics. There's a fundamental problem in education research. It's not a systemic problem. It's a methods problem in a sense, which is it's always been very challenging for folks doing qualitative research to analyze video. If you're only looking at a single student, solving a math problem on a piece of paper, Chris, to take your old model of how people learned. Maybe that's easy, I don't know, but that's very different than what we would like to have support for. So imagine in like a typical classroom that Engage AI will do implementations in, there are groups of 3 or 4 students working together in collaborative learning fashion, a whole classroom full of that, plus at least a teacher, and maybe there's a teaching assistant too, if we're lucky. And all of that makes for a very, very challenging environment to do qualitative research on. So the kind of most science fiction development that I've seen over the last couple of years is in this area. So there's a project in the Institute that's called Engage VP, and it's a video question answering project. So imagine that an education researcher who had an hour's worth of video of kids doing collaborative learning in the classroom, and this is of course rich with conversations, pervading the room, were able to in contrast to what they're able to do now, which is it takes, weeks, months, years to analyze that data. What if instead they could pose a natural language question to an AI research supporter that would be something like, can you please show me a little snippet where a teacher provides comforting support to a teacher? I'm making up an example. It's actually a real example. And then have the system be able to pick into this enormous video base exactly the little interaction where a teacher does that. And there is a prototype of a system that can actually do it. And as I said, to me, it is very science fiction-y in a really exciting way. To do that, you really kind of need an institute. So we are very fortunate to have an Engage AI specialist in computer vision, in multimodal AI and natural language AI and machine learning. So you need all of that, plus you need learning scientists who can kind of help steer the formation of these sorts of tools. And I'm particularly excited about this because it holds enormous promise for being able to significantly accelerate the degree and the rate at which we do, and the quality that we do qualitative research. And I think that the knock-on implications of that are really going to be astonishing over the next few years.
And Kip, I imagine practitioners are excited about this as well. I mean, if they're doing the kind of learning that you do in your school, project-based learning, problem-based learning, a lot of small group work, a lot of interaction, when teachers get bored with teaching, I recommend that they become air traffic controllers because it's an easier job in terms of what you're keeping track of and pays better, probably. So I'm being a little sarcastic here, but I wonder what future you might see in sort of aids to teachers that could help with managing a classroom that's intensely learning by doing and collaborative.
So many thoughts. That's why I'm always learning from these wonderful researchers. I think there can be like 2 ways to go. One of the things I just thought about as I'm listening, a lot of times learning science research is very much focused on individual learner enhancing their learning and less about like an ecosystem of classroom and interaction. So I think AI does definitely provide that opportunity as James described. And as he was talking, and I know I have a little knowledge of that project because I'm associated with Engage AI. What I would love to see is also how that trains our teachers. As much as we believe that teachers understand the benefits, full benefits of collaborative learning, that is very emotionally draining because you're working with students who have been trained or who have been educated in a very traditional environment. So when I try to encourage my teachers to fully immerse themselves in problem-based learning or project-based learning, they find resistance even from the learners because it's is very uncomfortable and foreign to them and too open-ended, right? Especially highly achieving students who have experienced this success. So that support mechanism that shows in very tangible way data that this is actually yielding better result than, say, another worksheet generated by AI, that would be a dream. And that's why I'm very, very excited to think about these technologies. Another thing that I thought of is that I know there are lots of researchers out there, and sometimes this science fiction pipe dream is wonderful, and I want us to continue going down that road. But I've been working with this researcher from Northwestern that does simple voice analysis that gives the students and learners the data. If I can bring that from your estimation is sort of like low tech AI, but that doesn't even exist, right? And then what is available in the commercial market, because research to like narrow scope to commercial application to diffusion of all these technology takes time. That's why I think it's really hard to see sometimes all this wonderful technology never get in the hands of the teachers who lack the knowledge as well as resource. So a lot of thoughts. I don't know whether I answered your question.
I think this is a nice segue to my question. Having been a teacher myself, I'm always curious about how would something look like in the real world classroom. If I were to use this tomorrow in my class, how might that look like? So I'm very intrigued about how AI-enabled storytelling would look like in the classroom.
I can start here. So I think of there being kind of two ways of conceiving this. One is, what will it look like in, say, 5 years or 10 years? And I'm not even going to hazard a guess there, because even the rendering technologies and AR, VR are changing so quickly. It's really difficult to tell. But I can describe what they look like today, and then maybe we can all sort of imagine what they'll look like in the future. So today, what it looks like is, imagine a very vibrant classroom. So if you were to look at Engage AI videos, this is what you would see. It is a very noisy classroom, noisy in a good way. And students are gathered around tables, and usually they're working 3 or 4 together. You can think of it as a sort of a jigsaw-based computer-supported collaborative learning, if you're familiar with that. And then a whole classroom filled with these groups. So students are given a problem, sort of a problem trigger at the beginning of the learning episode. And from a kind of game perspective, they're working with a multiplayer game. From an AI and education perspective, it's sort of multi-student learning in the richest possible sense. So there's, for each one of these tables, there's an instance of the story world, and they're all immersed in it. Then sort of multiply that across the whole classroom, and you end up with a very, very rich set of conversations. In one particular version of this called Eco Journeys, which is for middle school ecology, there is a sort of two-pronged set of discussions that are going on. So one is in the text chat. So it's a functionality that's built into the game. It's kind of argumentation focus. So the students are solving problems together in their group, taking on different roles. But of course, it's also lots of verbal discussion. And this is, it's a fantastically energizing sort of situation to be in. As Kip said, it also is, a great challenge to teachers to kind of orchestrate these sorts of scenarios. But at the end of the day, at least this is my sense of it, when I'm seeing this happen, I think, gosh, this is something like this is what learning should be like. And you see like real arguments in a happy way between the kids, and you see them deeply engaged in core science concepts. And it's the kind of problem solvers I think that we're going to be depending on, for our next generation of leaders.
I can quickly go back and answer a question that you raised, Chris, about noisy classrooms collecting, students' conversational data from these classrooms. I think the technology has evolved sufficiently, but we also tried to be smart. So the situation that James mentioned, where there are probably four students working together on a desk and then number of such desks in the classroom, if you strategically place microphones right in the middle of the desk, it turns out that using some signal analysis, the conversations that the students on that desk are having are much louder than say the surroundings. So if you can filter out by that method, we primarily get most of the conversations that are happening between the four students at the desk. And then diarization has become much more advanced now. So diarizing, we are able to through automated means able to get to about 80 to 85% accuracy. There's still a little bit that we have to do manually. And the other, so we try to be as innovative as possible. So when students are doing the embodied learning and they're moving around in the room, they wear helmets with a POSIX tracker so that they can be tracked as they move. So we also put a little microphone on their helmet. So that way the same idea holds, in the sense that that student's voice is captured much more louder than say the surrounding noise. So we are able to filter out most of the surrounding noise and then analyze what this person is saying. But the important thing, and James mentioned that we have core AI researchers. We have a colleague at Indiana who's used a combination of video and speech to determine who the speaker is in a group in a very noisy environment. So maybe one modality is not sufficient, but when you combine two modalities, your inferences about who's speaking and what they're speaking then is much more reliable. So we are truly, quote unquote, using multimodal analysis. We are trying to combine different modalities to get more reliable inferences for the information that we are looking for.
And I think technology will evolve. I have no doubt. There are a lot of smart people working on it. But I think the social and leadership issues. So when I'm trying to engage my teacher leaders or even my district leaders, there is the knowledge gap, right? Because I've been in this sort of domain for a while, so I can understand, or I can say, oh, that tool is not going to work because it's not based on sound learning technologies, or that practice would not be very good for my students. And that sort of the leadership vacuum, if you will, as we're hyper-focused on the learners and teachers, I keep coming back to that, because when I was a tech coach trying to bring these amazing technologies to the classrooms, I was not allowed to do that when a principal did not want it, right? That's not a technology problem, that's a human problem. And I don't know that this is the right venue to talk about it, but I have to bring it back, because no matter how good the technology is, if the leadership and then the philosophy and attitude and ethics not allowing it to do its job, then it's just going to keep sitting in the shelf, and then students and faculty will not benefit from it.
Thank you. I'm going to take us in a slightly different direction, and I want to contextualize that a little bit. So back in, I think, early 2000s, there was this researcher, and this is not a ding on the researcher at all, BJ Fogg, who had this sort of framework for computers as persuasive technologies, with the very great intention that we could use, nudges and so on in the design of our technologies for enhancing better behaviors, or beliefs or thinking and so on. Turns out that most of the graduates of the program ended up working for these major social media companies, where these tools were then used in ways that got more engagement for sure, but also pushed more extreme content, persuaded people in the wrong way. And I think about myself back in 2007 and 8, when social media was first coming along, where we were the Arab Spring was happening, and there was this sort of sense of like the democratization of knowledge, and this palpable sense of like, wow, this is the new Gutenberg revolution, right? And we sort of all know how that turned out, right? And we also have a sense, an honest conversation going on nationwide about banning cell phones in classrooms, and all of these discussions going on. And so one of the big concerns and worries I have is not that the research that we are doing is not going to have an impact, but that the world around us, the technology entering the world, changes the environment within which classrooms exist. So at this point in time, irrespective of whether a teacher uses social media in creative, thoughtful ways, it doesn't really matter because the world around us has dramatically shifted. And that's the kind of thing that I sort of feel very concerned about. The flip side, the other sort of aspect of that is that these technologies are incredibly powerful, persuasive technologies by the use of natural language, by the use of emotive language, and our sort of innate propensity to anthropomorphize. I mean, I don't think we can ever switch that off. I mean, we are social beings. Huge part of our prefrontal cortex is devoted to interpreting beliefs, desires of other people. And now we are going to have this agent in the classroom. We're going to have, which is going to have an incredible amount of information about each of us. And so there's that other, so there are sort of two aspects to this, which sort of, I don't know, I'm not going to say keep me up at night, but they are things that I've been thinking and writing a lot and thinking a lot about, which is the sort of the weaponization of this technology to persuade, to manipulate, to market, and so on, which we've already seen how that has been done with social media, which is a nascent form of AI, if you think, or machine learning, if you think about it, in terms of taking decisions. And then there's the other aspect of the world itself being transformed because of these, where all the effort that we as educators put in just becomes, it's just lost in the broader noise of this technological change. I wonder how you guys are sort of, I'm struggling, this is absolutely honest, I'm struggling to figure out my location in this container or in this space, like what my role is, as somebody who's been doing ed tech and believes in its power and so on. But then I see these broader trends and I see the history of it, and it really, really sort of concerns me. And I would love any insights that you have, because it might help me think about what my positionality is in this space. So sorry for this long sort of a contextualized sort of a question, but this does sort of concern me, and I'd love to hear from how each of you is thinking, or the center, broadly speaking, is engaging with these sort of bigger issues, which may be outside of your sort of funding, but I think those are ones that we need to be thinking about as a field.
James, could I go first, or do
Sure,
you want?
Please.
go ahead.
So you raise a great question, right? And it's a point I brought up earlier. I think there are two ways I would answer this question. One is the AI human aspect. So when we are doing AI, you don't want to remove the human stakeholders in the loop, the human stakeholders for which you're building this AI from the loop. So right, we've done small studies where we've developed these AI systems. The most interesting was we took a face tracking system into a classroom and let students work with it, right? So the webcam was on as they were doing some work on the computer. We face tracked them, and then 5 minutes later we said, hey, here is what the face tracking algorithm did, right? Here is where you thought you were getting frustrated. Here's where you were getting confused. Here's where you showed surprise, etc. And what was the initial reaction from the system? This is useless. It does not understand what we were thinking, right? So we are not going to accept what it says. On top of that, right, the students were really worried that we were, because you can also capture disengagement, they were worried that this kind of technology would be used for punitive purposes, right? That we would record this information and give it to the teacher, and the teacher would come after the student for being disengaged for a couple of minutes while they were thinking about something else. We continued this discussion. So the next thing that we did was we said, hey, let's take a deeper dive. Let's understand how this face tracking algorithm works. So we went through a very simple algorithm where, we said that most algorithms use these 16 locations on your face, and then depending on how they're moving or their position, right, the AI algorithm then infers, right, whether you're confused, whether you're frustrated, whether you're disengaged, etc. And it was really interesting to see the students' feedback, right? The first thing they say, oh yeah, we see how naive this AI algorithm is, right? But now we understand it, and maybe we can train it, right, so that it starts performing better. And then the response to the other question was, hey, don't let the teacher know what our affective states are. Why don't you sort of just inform my friend? So if I'm having difficulty, maybe one of my friends sitting in some other part of the classroom, can come up and help me resolve the problem. And that's a much better way of doing it than, say, you directly going to the teacher. So all of these we are taking into account, right? I'm not saying we've solved the problem as you posed it, Punya, but I think these are steps, right, that we are realizing that if we interact with the stakeholders, we make them more AI literate. They are not going to be sort of antagonists to the technology we are introducing, but they will feel that they are partners, and together the technology and they might find the solutions that would be effective for them and for learning in general. So that's my response. I'm sure James has other things to say too.
Thank you.
I know we're short on time, so I'll just make one quick observation. We're living in such a rapidly changing time, and Punya, as you say, the forces are strong and unpredictable. One could have never have imagined the social media happening that we've seen back in 2007, 2008. However, as a sort of I'll call it an empirically based optimist, I am so excited about living in what promises to be sort of the golden age of the learner. I mean, there's not a better time to want to sort of deeply engage with learning, not just for our students, but for all of us. And one of the things that these technologies very readily lend themselves to is learning support. So I'm very hopeful that is used for good, and we're able to use it to improve policy and society more broadly.
Kip, you have the final word.
Thank you. I say that we have to continue talking about and raising the issues. And I say that technologists should recognize that when you create a piece of technology, it's not value neutral. It definitely has this underlying philosophy of more and faster is always better. And I keep talking about slow and deliberate, sometimes better. So we have to start recognizing that you're not a neutral party. You're actually making a call, and you're putting in your own understanding and biases into the system, and we have to call that out. And second thing, as a high school principal, I will tell you, our young people are watching, and they are actually so much more sometimes concerned about environmental impact of these technologies that we're developing and ethical implication and the mental health aspect of it. So I actually am a, what did you say, James? Empirical optimist. I'm on that camp, in that's why I think we need to really recognize and elevate student voice in these conversations.
Well, I want to thank all three of you both for a wonderful conversation and for the work that you're doing with Engage AI. My own personal point of view, looking at all the AI in education institutes, is the one that's tackling the biggest challenges in foundational AI is actually your institute. It's a very wonderful aspirational vision. I hope you're able to get traction on it. And I think that our viewers today will find this whole prospect quite exciting. Punya, do you want to talk about next Saturday?
Yes, I don't have a great many details, but from what I gather from Kurt, we are going to actually have students from Nepal joining us back again after 4 years. I think we had them as guests 4 years ago, and that still remains one of my favorite episodes about these kids who were taking MOOCs. It was a very inspiring episode. I think we have three of those students coming back and giving us an update on where they are today. It is at a new time, with even though we are not streaming on YouTube anymore, it will be at 11 a.m. Eastern. And we hope that you can join us there. And I just want to thank all of you Gautam, Kip, and James for joining us today. And we could have gone on. The hour always goes by too fast. So thank you for joining us. Have a wonderful rest of your weekend and see you soon.